This is the Convene podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Convene Talk. My name is Maggie, digital media editor. Michelle, tell us more about the story and the event that you selected for today's discussion.
Thanks, Maggie. I chose a story from BizBash called C2 Montreal 2024, How a New Venue Aimed to Inspire Networking and Connection. And the reason why I chose this is, well, actually, there are a couple of reasons. One is that I was lucky enough to go to the first C2 Montreal many years ago. And I was so impressed by it that I recommended that one of the founders speak at a Pcma event. I think it was EduCon. I don't think it was Convening Leaders. And he spoke at the event, and there were very few people in the room. And the comment that we heard most often was like, yeah, I can't compete with, I don't have a budget like that. I can't do an event that is that innovative and creative, and which was disappointing to me because I understand that's definitely true, but I was hoping that there would be some sources of inspiration that they could potentially integrate in their own event, or at least think differently about their event. So C2 Montreal is very closely tied to the destination, Montreal, and it draws from the creative people and business people in Montreal. And it was co-founded with Cirque du Soleil. So there's that very creative element of the event. And it's just this intersection of creativity, design, business, technology, sort of like a South by Southwest, but very different flavor. They've been in 6 different locations, and each one is the venue is unique. This time it was the Grand Quay. And if I were to say, which looked like a really phenomenal location right on the St. Lawrence River, if I were to say the thing that I got from this article that could be implemented by anybody, I thought was cool, was that they organized the program. It's a 3-day program, and each day had a different theme. So each day the content was devoted to, one day was experiential and immersive, the next was sustainability and innovation, and the third was AI and commerce. And I thought, I know that events and PCMA does this a lot with different tracks that go for each day, but I thought it was a different way to look at the educational programming in terms of just we're focusing on this one day, this and this the rest of the time. And it seemed to me to be a really nice way to organize the content. So that is like my simple takeaway. But Barbara, I see that you have your hand raised. What did you think of the article?
You know, the thing that struck me, this is Barbara, I'm deputy editor. I also have been to 2 or 3 C2 Montreals. And what struck me about this article is that some of the things that I saw years ago, the pictures looked exactly the same, that they're still doing some of the same things, like having everybody go up and use the room as the labs looked very similar. One year when I went, you actually climbed up onto a walkway built on the ceiling and walked around on the ceiling so you could look down and get another vantage point, suspended from the ceiling, not walking on the ceiling. And I feel like what they have done is something that everybody is talking about now, and that is focusing on experience and networking. The thing that most impressed me, and this has been like maybe 8 years ago, is that they personalized your experience. They had built a structure where you could go in and you could listen quietly to speakers and to interactions. And they also projected it outside so you could sit at a little table with somebody else and talk about what's going on and still hear it. And it was filled with art installations and things that you could just get your hands into. And you could the point was not going from session to session and everybody taking in the same content. The focus was on your experience of it. So I thought that what they were doing as pioneers has really come to be something that really the whole industry is talking about now. Curt, what's on your mind?
The thing that I liked about this was where it took place and the idea of having the outside space. And I think that's also something that people who maybe don't have a budget could sink their teeth into, I guess, because there are a lot of places, depending on the size of your event, I guess, where like I walk a lot in Berlin, and I've walked by a place that, it's by the river, and I think, oh, look at this open area right here. And then there's this warehouse, and I'm like, this would be an awesome place for a meeting venue or something like that. And then I go home and I look up the area and I find out that, oh, that is a meeting venue. That was a meeting venue. There's space inside that just looks like a warehouse on the outside, but it's like this beautiful meeting and event space inside, and it's right next to the water. And there's a big open area where you can do outside events and stuff. And I think those kind of things, being able to get out there outside, sort of helps with networking more than a loud party. Like not having music, maybe just having, finger food or whatever, and just walking around and chatting. And the other thing that I liked in this was something that somebody brought up. I was doing some interviews, and they brought up the idea of this event app that is powered with, the capabilities to we talked about basically to have recaps of the day's events, but also have some kind of super powered thing where you can connect with people long before the event starts, and get to know people, set up appointments or whatever, or just say, there's going to be this thing on the beach, let's go there and talk, whatever, or so that's something that I really liked from this, that I think anybody could do if they find the right spot. Jen?
Thanks, Curt. Yeah, I just wanted to jump off of what you were saying right there with the app being embedded with AI, and the fact that they dedicated an entire day to the topic of AI and commerce. That kind of struck me as interesting that they chose that, but also not surprising. This morning I was reading about how the newest iOS release for Apple for all devices is basically, it was just entirely AI. I don't know if any of y'all watched the presentation yesterday or read anything about it, but there's just so much that Apple is changing as it relates to AI, like how you use your phone, the capabilities, the software AI will be completely embedded in. And I think, I'm kind of curious to know, regardless of the industry, when planners are thinking ahead, are they all considering now like AI to be, kind of an umbrella topic that they're going to include? I'm curious to know, because it really, to me, seems like there isn't any industry that will escape AI, good and bad. Controversial, but I think it is inescapable. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting. Do y'all have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a thought on that. I would love to hear from someone who lives in Montreal a perspective about how the conference and the AI industry in Montreal have grown together, like what kind of influence they've had on each other. Because when I looked back at a story that I did, honestly, nearly a decade ago, AI was a big part of it. So I feel like that was probably because of the nascent industry, or maybe well-established industry there in Montreal at the time. But I think the fact that you talk about, we talk about the locally grown food, but there's also the locally grown expertise and knowledge. And I think that conference is an exemplary example of taking advantage of the locally grown expertise.
One thing I really liked about it, kind of jumping off of what Barbara was saying about how the event in Montreal have grown together, is that this is the 6th site change since its inception, which is interesting just because so many meetings kind of jump around from destination to destination, and that's how they freshen things up. But of course, this is always in Montreal. So in the article, they were saying that the Grand Quay of the Port of Montreal was chosen because it's sort of a campus-like setting. And they liked that because they felt like it fostered creativity and collaboration. And it's a newer venue space, which just also shows that they're willing to grow and evolve as the city grows and changes and use those new venue spaces, which is really neat. Maggie?
Yeah, and connected to that destination or venue change that you mentioned, I noticed that they did not do a virtual component this year. And speaking of AI, I was a bit curious about why not, having in mind that they've done it before. And then in the article, they mentioned, well, it will kind of reappear in a surprising way throughout the year. So I'm really curious about what that surprise will be right now and how they're going to use this virtual component in a different way. And what I actually love about C2 Montreal, even though I've never been, but of course I've followed it through the years because it's a very interesting event, especially because it's a business event, is the formats and how much thought goes into the formats that they are presenting each year. And I hear what those planners said, Michelle, back when they heard the CEO speak about C2 Montreal, that it's expensive. I think that's the first perception people have when they hear about something that's more innovative or an event that really has a lot of thought poured into those formats and the way the way it's created, basically. And I'm thinking, is it really a budgetary constraint or really having enough people and the right people put in the right places so that you can create the formats that you envision? And this also brings me back to our TED discussion and how kind of TED came to be, because just the founder had this idea of bringing these people together. He just wanted to hear from them in a different way from what was usually accepted. So I don't think necessarily there are budget constraints. Oh, I mean, yes, sometimes there are, but sometimes it really comes down to putting a bit more thought and being more intentional about the event that you're creating. Michelle?
Just like piggybacking off of that, I think part of it is finding the right sponsors for an event. So their focus is very experiential. So in the story, they talked about a nonprofit environmental organization called Age of Union Alliance, which unveiled a black hole experience designed by a multidisciplinary artist. So it's a mobile exhibition. So they went in and they actually had an experience. I don't know what it was because we were not given enough information, but we know that it wasn't a lecture about sustainability. It was a way to immerse themselves in something where that message was conveyed. And I would imagine that it was paid for by a sponsor because that's a nonprofit. So I think that if you do make, to Barbara's point, experiential has become sort of a byword of events now. And if you focus on creating those experiences and just find the proper sponsor for it, that's a way to incorporate it without incurring the extra expense. Sounds easy, I know, but I think that's just a direction to go in.
Yeah, and the fact that this event is so closely knitted with the community and the city and what they want to promote and develop in the city. I always love these events because they carry something special. There's something different, and while it's very local and very grounded into the location, it really brings something, an oomph that event planners can relate to. And even if you're an international participant, I'm sure you can bring a lot home. Barbara?
I was just thinking about the fact that we just published the cover story about the maker economy. And I recalled that was at C2 Montreal is the first place that I ever saw a marketplace of locally made items. And they were for sale. It was almost like a little gift shop. And it was like, locally made. There were postcards, there were knitted, like at all kinds of things. And that was thinking like they really have been truly ahead of the curve on lots and lots of stuff.
Barbara, a long time ago, when I first started here, you wrote about giving your event a sense of place and finding ways to do that. And I think this event especially does that, but it does it in more than just a surface way. Like you don't just have the food of the place, and then you're giving it a sense of place. It seems like they know so well, the organizers of this event know so well everything happening in Montreal almost. They use every sort of university or startup or anything that they find that they think is interesting, and they seem to team up with them. And so it's like it's in the DNA, it's the core of the event. It's just there.
It is part of their model because part of it is funded by the government in order to promote the destination. So it is part of, it's like embedded in their whole model is to promote the best of Montreal, which, is not the case for every destination. But I do think there is something to be taken from that people really, and the fact, to Casey's point, that they've been in 6 different locations, they are giving attendees different versions of Montreal, different places in Montreal, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the locally made food. Like if you're in a ballroom with a plate that looks like every other plate you've ever been served, the fact that carrot comes from within 5 miles is great, but it's not something that you experience. It's kind of a technicality. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And it sounds like they did. I don't know if they work with the people who do the presentations and stuff, but just reading these captions on all these photos that are with this article, it sounds like they were very interactive sessions. Like this one where they used lasagna
as a metaphor,
preparing lasagna as a metaphor to exploit neurodiversity and promote inclusion through the collective effort. I mean, that's just, who would think of that, right? I mean, me being at an event, I would not expect something like that. That's just really cool.
And to Barbara's point, they've done that kind of lab from the very beginning, that kind of very, very different kind of hands-on learning. I also thought the one session that they had a photo of with a quiz where people were quizzed on their knowledge of something is an interesting way to start a session, right? Just to get a kind of the temperature of the room. I just think that's another easy way to really, but then you have to create, your content has to be based on what that room said. So you may have to switch gears and not talk about what you thought because maybe there's a lack of understanding about the basics of the topic. Or maybe they're more sophisticated and they've heard more and so you thought you were doing something more introductory, but in fact you should be presenting something at a higher level. So I could see that actually being really difficult to pull off in terms of execution in the moment.
Unless you were a good improv person as well as a tech person.
Yeah. I would be interested to know if they combine that like with in-app polling. Like I was thinking, boy, that's so much more fun than, answering those polling questions. But then I thought, well, you don't have to do either or. You could do both.
Right.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. As long as the quiz wasn't like a game, because that is something that has come out of the research is that people are not that into the gamification like everyone thinks. Not
right.
Maybe that was a trend. I don't know that it still is, unless you have a highly competitive audience.
Or a really big prize.
Event planners are competitive by nature, I feel. So that applies to the industry. I've actually been at an industry event years ago, but I'm blanking which one was it, that we could select which speakers to go and actually create the program in the morning. And that was very interesting experience, I think, also for the speakers, because it was I think they had to come up on stage in the very first morning session and kind of give a brief overview of what their session was going to be about. And then the attendees had to pick, let's say, 3 of those speakers out of, let's say, 6. I don't remember the details. It was years ago, but I've seen it only once, and it was fun, definitely, because it was audience curated experience. We all decided and voted what we wanted to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. What if you have a sexier presentation, summary than somebody else? Then people go to your session. So it's also tricky if you don't prepare in advance with a sexy version. I think AI can help now with that. Put out those big words. I think we had a very good, brief overview of C2 Montreal. Thank you all for the discussion. The article will be linked in the show notes as usual. And don't forget to support us, subscribe, listen, share, send us a note how you like the podcast. And as always, until next time.